for our noontime talk. This is a new thing we're trying out, and we're very, very pleased with the turnout. So thanks for joining us today to listen to Alan Taylor speak about the art of car restoration. And I recently asked Alan when he started his career, and he told me when he was 8 years old as an upholsterer's apprentice. So it is a pleasure to have such a master in the house. He specializes in restoring rare, classic, and exotic cars, and has earned honors such as Best in Show for the famed Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance, which is sort of the ultimate fashion show for cars. So please join me in welcoming Alan Taylor.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for being here this morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Alan Taylor from Alan Taylor Company. Today we're going to talk about the art of restoration, how to do it, what it looks like, why we get it that way, why we don't do any more than we normally do, and why we do so much to some cars. So I'd like to start out by saying thank you very much to the PETERSEN Automotive Museum for allowing me to come this morning and to speak to you. I enjoy doing this sort of events, and it's always a pleasure. When we receive a vehicle into our shop, it can look like most anything. This old Seagraves fire truck is destined to become a race car. But what we see is a finished product rolling down the highway, doing 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. We start dismantling the project, the cars, and we put them into categories. We divide every vehicle into 3 categories: the body, chassis, and interior. Then we start dismantling the components a piece at a time. We put them in plastic bags or cups or cans. We label them, identify them, photograph them, and decide what we're going to do with them after we inspect them. We are either going to repair or remake a part. The bits and pieces that we can't find, or that we don't, that are too far gone to use, we go to swap meets and car shows and look for them. You may have seen the slideshow out front where we were looking for parts at Retromobile in France. It's exciting to find new parts and new pieces. And I'm going to pass around a couple of items for you to look at. And this is the sort of thing that we find at swap meets. It's all right to take it out of the box or to open it up, handle it, take it apart, look at it. You can't hurt it. If the box tears, that's all right. That's what it's for, is to look at for now. Sometimes we make molds to make small parts in. This is a dash knob. And we took this little knob. It was all beat up it was only about half there. So we modeled it up in clay, and then we put it into a silicone cup, just a Dixie cup filled with silicone, and stuck this out the bottom end of the cup. And when it dried, why, we had a mold. Took a razor blade and slit it in 4 places, and we can pop it out. And it makes a quick mold, an easy mold, and we can make, probably 10, 20 pieces out of that one little mold. So we tear the vehicles down and we just find stuff like this. You see all that nasty welding on there? Now that was a piece of steel that somebody used to repair that chassis. That's the frame off of a Minerva AL. The book for that, showing that vehicle finished, is on the desk over here on the front table. Then we make a new part, we clamp it in place, and we weld it together in a proper fashion. Grind it down and finish the part, and after it's painted, you will never know that it has ever been repaired. Structural integrity is absolute importance. You can't have a car going down the road that looks beautiful, rattling, banging, and bending and breaking. It's just, you just can't let that happen. So we do a lot of repairs, we make a lot of parts. There's a lot of panel beating that goes on. This car was sitting on a platform getting its Best in Show award, and the backdrop fell over on it and did severe damage to it. We repaired the car, all the damage, without putting an ounce of filler on it. It was all metal finished. When a car is far enough along that we can start refitting parts to it, we start with the components, and we refit the components. We repair them and put them in place and make sure they're going to match up with everything else before we go on with the final restoration. Now here's an old fire truck that's made into a race car, very similar to that Seagraves that you saw in the very beginning. We even have to fit the bodies to the chassis to make sure that they're going to be a good marriage so that everything lines up. So before the car can be painted, it all has to go back together again, and everything readjusted, realigned. Things have a tendency to expand and contract when you take them apart and work on them. You start beating on a piece of metal, it's going to stretch somewhere and it's going to shrink somewhere else. So that's why we fit everything back together before it's finished. This is a Type 46 Bugatti engine. They're an absolute work of art, beautiful piece of mechanical art. They also run extremely well. They're fast, they're strong, they're huge, they weigh a bazillion pounds. They have a crankshaft that takes 2 men to pick it up and handle it. But when they run and run right, they're smooth and almost dead silent. They're absolutely beautiful. Fitting the engine back to the chassis, this is a final fit where the car has been painted, the body is finished, it's put back on the frame, and now we're fitting the engine and transmission back into it. There's a lot of Bugattis around this room, and they're very, very, very similar to the ones you're seeing in these pictures. Sometimes we run into problems, and the only way to get to it is on your back with a flashlight on the floor, with weight on the axles, and find the problem, figure out a plan to resolve it, and fix it. I tell my guys in the shop, don't complain about it, don't whine. I don't want to hear your tales and your stories. Just fix it. I don't care what it looks like as long as it's perfect. There's a beautiful tail light, and that little tail light, we made that from about 3 different tail lights. They were all in various stages of disrepair, and we took all the best parts to make one good tail light. These side lights are unique in that they have, they're very small. They go on the front windshield post, and there's a red lens, a green lens, and a clear lens. Just like a boat has a red and blue or red and green for right and left, back in the early days of automobiles, they used the same procedure. Now, when we are doing a wiring in a car, if we're lucky enough to find a wiring diagram, we blow that diagram up to where us old men can read it. The young guys don't care, but we do. So we make the diagram big enough to where it's readable, and we can see all of the various problems. We have our own machine shop, paint and body shop, metal fitting, and upholstery shop. Here the car is going back together, fitting the trunk and fitting the fenders. The body's been painted, the fenders have been repaired, and there's one final fit before we send them to paint. There's an awful lot of wood in these old coach-built cars. This particular car, this body was off the chassis and it was sitting in a barn for about 40 years, sitting on a dirt floor. Well, the termites went right up through the dirt and into that car. When we went to pick up the body, it fell apart. The wood in that body was just an empty shell, and the termites had eaten almost every piece of wood out of that car. It was just amazing that it was like an eggshell. And you just take a piece of wood and crush it in your fingers. So the bulk of this car had to have new wood put in it. I think everything except the doors. The doors were up on a shelf, and they escaped the termites. So there was only a minimal amount of wood repair in the doors. Sometimes we're very fortunate to get a nice clean body with good sheet metal on it. This was one of them. The only metal that we replaced on this particular car was a space about 2 inches tall at the bottom of each door, where water had set in between the wood and the metal for years and years and rusted out the bottom edge of that door. Otherwise, absolutely every piece of metal on this car was original and unmolested. We're really fast at our shop. The beautiful wheels. These wheels are cast aluminum wheels. The brake drums are cast into the wheel itself, and the wheel has fins on it for right and left, so you don't mix up the direction of the wheels. You have a right wheel and a left wheel, because it draws the air in and blows it across the brake drum. So it cools the whole wheel cools the brake drum. This car has a leather top. We had to buy several leather hides, good big hides, that had the proper grain in them to match the original material. And then we found the one that had the least imperfections in it, that was the biggest of the hides, and that's the one that we used for the top. So that top was made, the majority of the top was made in one piece, one giant piece of leather. Oftentimes we have to repair or even make hardware. Bugatti made his own hardware. Now it was metric, but the pitch on the threads was different than the standard metric sizes. So you couldn't take a standard 5mm metric nut and put it on a 5mm Bugatti bolt, because you'd get about 2 threads on and it would bind up. My mechanic hates Bugatti, and he doesn't he doesn't have nice things to say about them, just for that reason. This car, we just got it started. That's the mechanic, the bald guy. And if some of you have been around this area for a long time, that's Herb Glazer. He's worked at a number of restoration shops in Southern California. Time for chrome plating. Everything has to come apart. You never replate something with rivets in it. You take the rivets out, you disassemble it, you plate each individual part separately, and then you put them back together. If the rivets were shiny, you chrome plate the head of the rivet and keep the plating off of the shank of the rivet so that you don't have the buildup around the edge. Once in a while there's an exception, when you find a part that the manufacturer put together, riveted it together or soldered it together and then plated it all in one piece. When that happens, then you do exactly what the original manufacturer did. On this Delahaye grill, we ended up having to make a whole new grill because the old grill was just so bad that it was not reusable. We made each individual part. You see they're numbered. Before it went to plating, we stamped that number in the back side of the brass part, and then it went to plating for finish, and then that gave us the ability to reassemble it after it was plated. Small parts, we generally use a local plater in San Diego. He does a wonderful job with the small parts. When we get to large parts, great big pieces, We typically send those to a larger plating shop that is accustomed to handling the bigger pieces. On the chassis, again, when we start for painting, some chassis are scuffed and primed and painted. Other chassis are stripped down to the bare metal and brought back up from the bare metal. This particular project required a minimal of expense, and so we elected to just sand it, prime it, and paint it. Now, this yellow chassis, that was taken all the way down to bare metal, and every part painted individually and then reassembled after paint. Painting springs. How many of you have painted a spring? Yeah, okay, you know the problems in painting a spring. Never sandblast a spring. You take the temper out of it. Even if you just take the surface temper out, it'll damage the spring. So springs have to be chemically stripped. The wood in these cars was originally painted with a brush, and so that's what we paint them with in our shop. We brush paint the wood. It's a good way to make sure that it's sealed up real well and doesn't get any moisture in it. But even if it's going to be captured in metal, it needs to be painted. And so does the back side of the metal that's going to go up against it. Anytime you get moisture or have an opportunity to get moisture between the wood and the metal, you're going to have corrosion, you're going to have damage to the wood and damage to the metal. Feeling the surface of a car, you can pick up highs and lows with your hand much easier than you can with your eye. A good way to feel a surface is to take a very thin piece of cloth like a handkerchief and set it up on the part that you're looking at, and then use it under your hand to rub the surface very lightly, and you'll find highs and lows in that surface much faster and easier than you would if you just ran your hand across it. The final step before painting is not priming, it's cleaning. The primer has to be absolutely perfectly clean, sterile, no contaminants, no chance for anything to be on it that could cause the paint not to stick. Then the paint goes on in light coats, and you use maybe a 2 or 3 coat buildup with today's paint. Whereas back in the early days when we painted everything with lacquer, you'd put 3 coats on, let it dry, sand it, put 3 more coats on, let it dry, sand it, and you'd end up with about 9 or 10 coats of paint by the time you got enough paint on the car to color sand and buff the car. With today's materials, particularly in California where we have to use water-based paints, we use a two-part system. We use a base coat and a clear coat. And the base coat, you can put it on with usually 2 to 3 coats of color, and then another 2 to 3 coats of clear. Now the clear goes on relatively heavy, and it's a very solid material. It flows out very nice. And so with 3 coats of clear, you can sand, color sand and buff a car, and you still have room to go back and color sand and buff it another couple of times if it gets surface scratches in it. So there are some good things about today's modern paints, and then there are some irritating things about today's modern paints. Mike Adams is a restorer that worked for me for quite a while, and then he decided to go out on his own and open his own shop, and so we have now contracted with Mike to do all of our paint and body work in his new shop. The customer is the man on the right. He's going in to see his car painted for the first time. This car is the exact colors that it was when it was built new in 1930. And that car won in 1930 at the Paris Concours d'Elegance. It won Best of Show, Ladies' Choice, and Most Elegant. All 3 awards. It was a spectacular car. And we'll see some more of it as we go along. But we have a happy customer there. Now, you always have some imperfections that you have to take care of. Perhaps a flake of dust gets in the paint, and you can see the man sanding out with a very, very small piece of sandpaper and a paint stick with the sandpaper wrapped around it. And he's getting a very small speck of dust or maybe a little bit of orange peel away from that bottom edge. Anything, especially where you have two dissimilar colors coming together, you have to be very careful and make sure that you always sand right up to the edge and not through it. Paul Ney is a coach builder, a French coach builder, and that coach builder's tag was cast in sterling silver originally, and that was an original tag. Final fitting, final assembly, everybody gets excited. First time we start the car up and drive it, that's really exciting. We always drive the car before it's completely finished because you never know what you're going to find. So with the engine already run in on a stand, we know that the engine runs fine, works, but all the rest of it has to work as well. So we take it out and run it around the block a half a dozen times before we start putting fenders on and hoods and trimming. There are miles and miles of wiring in these old cars, and they all have to have the right color. It all has to look proper. The gauges have to be of the proper vintage with all the proper insignias on them. And there's an enormous amount of research and labor that goes into just the wiring and the final assembly of the car. Now you see over on the left-hand side, you'll see an electric fuel pump and a filter. We do that on almost all of our cars. Filter is important, and we use these throwaway filters so they can be changed quickly and easily. Customers like to be able to drive their cars and know that they're going to start and run properly. So we use an electric fuel pump to prime the system with, and then a shut-off switch under the dash where you can turn the fuel pump off and go to the original manual pump. Bugatti wiring is a very specific color and type, and has made very, very few changes from about 1934 to 1939. Now, this particular car is upholstered in suede. The original build sheet for the car says that it was suede, and the original pictures that we have of the car as delivered showed a very soft looking leather, and the pattern was very easy to identify and to make patterns from. because we had so many pictures of this car. And the research, that's why the research is so important, that you do the research first. Now, the spring unit, you just saw that rusty spring unit. We clean the spring units and we repair them. We replace springs as needed. If we don't have a spring that matches, we make it. Then the muslin or burlap goes on, and we build the, cover the spring unit with burlap. We put a fox edging on around the edges where we need a soft edge and a roll. Everything is done by hand, just like it was when the car was built new. The white material is called fox edging. Now, we're fortunate in that we can buy fox edging now, but we used to have to make it. We'd have to make it. We'd use hog hair and horse hair and cotton and a piece of muslin. And when I was a little kid, my dad made me sit and roll that stuff up and hand sew it all together. That was part of my job. You can see the different layers and processes that goes into the upholstering before any piece of leather is put on it. You see the amount of hand sewing on that seat cushion. That's an incredible number of hours per seat. Then the hog and horsehair combination goes on, and then a piece of muslin over the top of all of that. And then once you have that finished, then you can start making the leather covers. But the foundation is there. The foundation is made. You set it in the car, you feel it, you sit on it. If it's comfortable, it does all the right things, then you know that you're ready to upholster it. So just like preparing for paint is so important, preparing for the upholstery is equally as important. You have to remember you're going to sit on this. You want it to be comfortable. You want it to be durable. You don't want it to stretch out and look bad, because not only are you going to drive the car, you're going to show it. When we do these very ornamental door panels, it takes a very special sewing machine. We have a long arm machine and a double needle machine, and we have a boot machine. So you don't have just one sewing machine in a shop that does this kind of work. You usually have 4 or 5 different types of sewing machines. This set of seats is made out of deer skin, 2 different shades of brown. The leather was cut in strips, and deer skin is very thin and very fragile when it's in an upholstery grade. And so we had to cut it in strips wide enough that we could fold it over a piece of muslin, hand sew it on the bottom side, and then after we had all the strips made up, then we wove it. Each piece where it joined, underneath, we hand sewed it, tied it together so that it wouldn't stretch and move when we put it on the seat. Here's a piece of stingray upholstery. I'm going to walk over to the table here for just a minute, give you a little explanation of this, a little show and tell while we have this up here. This is the stingray skin that you see in the picture behind you. Now this skin has been sanded, and we custom dyed these skins in our shop. We bought them as bleached raw skins, sanded and ready to be dyed. Here is a skin that they make boot lasts out of. And this is what the stingray skin looks like originally. These nubs stick up, and they're round and they're hard, and they make beautiful boots. They also make beautiful upholstery. But the French designed furniture hundreds of years ago using stingray skins that were sanded, dyed, and waxed. And they're gorgeous. And in a few minutes, you'll be able to come up here and we'll show you some more of these. We've had a wonderful last, 10 years or so, in that we have always had a car at Pebble Beach. We have always placed somewhere at Pebble Beach with one of our cars. More times than not, have had multiple cars at Amelia Island. I think in the last 10 years, probably five of our cars have won Best of Show at La Jolla Concours d'Elegance. They're beautiful works of art. They're fun to drive. The people in this hobby are fun people. They're nice people. And it's fun to sit in a car and just talk and visit with the people that come by to admire the car. These are just some glamour shots from Pebble Beach of the car I've been talking about quite a bit. For the first time since 1932, that car sat on a lawn at a Concours d'Elegance in its original form, and it won its class. As we go through these next few pictures, there's Peter Mullen's car that we did the Stingray interior in. That car was a very, very quick, just kind of what we call a fluff and fold. We barely gave it a bath, painted a few parts of it and upholstered it, and that was it. Beautiful car. That's a Type 50 Bugatti. On the back table, you'll find a bunch of propaganda. You'll see these cards of showing the luggage that we make for automobiles. You'll also find a Can You Name It card that has 4 cars on the front, showing the front, and the same 4 cars showing their back on the back side. Now, what you do with this card is you go to my website and you figure out what each one of these cars is, and you go to your buddy that thinks that he knows everything about every car that was ever built, and you say, okay, what's that? And he goes, oh, that's easy, that's a Bugatti. You're right. What's that? Oh, that's easy, that's a Delahaye. You're right. What's that? Oh, that's easy, that's a Rolls Royce. No. Oops. What's that? Well, I don't know. And then you tell him. And then you say, now, next time you think you know it all, remember this. You see that little red light? That's from this Minerva right here. Those are turn signal lights, and they went up on the front windshield posts. And one of them was broken. And we looked for, about a year and a half for one of those glass lenses. Here in Europe, everywhere I could possibly think of, and couldn't find one. And so we were just about ready to have one cast in acrylic. And I was at Retromobile the year that we were finishing the car. And a friend of mine met me as I came in the door, and he said, Alan, are you still looking for that red lens? And I said, yes. He said, well, come with me. And we walked down the aisle and came to a table about 3 times the length of that one. There was nothing but red lenses of all types. And he reached over and he picked this lens up and he says, is this it? And I said, it is. And it was a new old stock glass lens. Made in Belgium in the late 20s, early 30s. A very, very low production. Very hard to come by. I don't remember, but I remember that it was not very much in relation to what it was and to how much I spent researching it. This Daimler 66, that hood from the windshield to the front frame horns was 9 feet. That was a big car. This Peugeot Darlmat we found in Apeldoorn, Holland, at a car show. I took a picture of it, brought it home, and showed it to one of my customers. And he says, I have to have it, see if it can be bought. And so we found it, we bought it, we restored it, changed the colors, and it's that car and parts of that car I still see in ads and on brochures and posters, because it was such a wild looking car. This is the La Jolla Concours d'Elegance. Oh, yeah, by the way, that car had a bar in it on one side and a library on the other side of the rear seat. And it had a curtain that zipped up and hid the bar so that they wouldn't get in trouble having open liquor in their car. I have been doing automotive art for more than 50 years. Automotive art in all shapes and forms and sizes and descriptions, and currently am doing these small pieces that have been used as trophies. And I've experiencing a wonderful, exciting time doing this particular type of automotive art and enjoying it very much. I have some catalogs from the La Jolla Concours from last year, and I have one from this year. If you would like to take a look at them. Now, I have the ones from last year. I'm going to give away here in a few minutes, but the one from this year, you take a look and you might recognize a couple of the cars on that. One of them is right behind me. That was poster car. These are some of the trophies that I've designed and that we build in our art studio. Best of show trophy is French curves, and the car and is made all out of French curves. The trophy with the scissors is in honor of my father, who was my mentor that I apprenticed with. He was an upholsterer, did fabulous work. And that's the Aubrey Taylor Award of Excellence for Best Upholstery. Custom luggage. We're now manufacturing luggage for both old cars and new cars. Trunks, suitcases, briefcases. We make bags for commercial use. We make bags for casual and for the very elegant as well. If we have dimensions of your car, your trunk, the space that the suitcases go in, and a picture of the suitcase itself, an original one, we can reproduce most any suitcase that you would have had in most any car. This set that we're building right here is for a Aston Martin DB4. It's a 4-piece set and made with Conley leather to match the interior of the DB4. Making the latch assemblies. Some of these latch assemblies have to be custom made, and you can't just buy something off the shelf because it's not like the picture. It's not like the original. And if you want your customer's car to win, it has to look like it came right out of the factory that originally built it. So we go to great lengths to build some of this custom hardware for the luggage. Now, purchased hardware, conventional hardware is easy, and it's still beautiful and looks lovely. These are the two cases that I have sitting out here on the table this afternoon. And When we're finished, you're very welcome to come up and open them and look at them, examine them. This is a really nice a set of luggage that we built for a Bugatti. And I particularly like the center ladies overnight case. But the ladies overnight case really turned out really nice. That's a bottle of Bugatti champagne and 2 glasses. And that's what we call the ladies overnight case. Now, we do build those as a separate item as well. This is a 3-piece set of luggage in a BMW Z8. You can see the curvature on the front of the lower piece of luggage matches the curvature of the inside of the trunk. Now, if you have a small luxury car or high performance car, you don't really have much room to put a piece of luggage. And if you let your wife stuff her blouses and nice pants into a backpack and throw it in the back end of your Corvette or your BMW, you're in trouble. She doesn't want to travel like that. So you have a set of custom-made luggage made for your car, and that way she can fold her clothes neatly, and when she gets to the hotel, why, they're not all wrinkled, and she doesn't have to iron them before she wears them. And you're the hero. Now, for the men and for the women both, we make custom-built briefcases. And I have my own briefcase up here on the counter. Last January, I was going to go to Barrett-Jackson, and I wanted to display my wares, but I didn't have anything to carry that was appropriate. So I figured, well, I'll just make something that's really gaudy and garish, and everybody will stop me and say, "Where did you get that?" And I did, and they did, and it gave me an opportunity to whip out my propaganda and hand it to them and say, "Here you are." And when you have an opportunity to repurpose a piece of material, even a pair of blue jeans, it's a good thing. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your being here. We will have a question and answer period now as we go to this table. I will tell you about leather, how to look for a good piece of leather and what's a bad piece of leather. And the question is, what do you do for an interior when there's nothing left to go by? And the answer,
fabric primarily.
Fabric. The answer is, if you can find the original manufacturer of the vehicle and get a build sheet, that oftentimes will tell you what it was, or at least give you a starting point. More times than not, even on a car that's been out in the weather, we can find a little piece of fabric somewhere stuffed between 2 pieces of wood or underneath a seat or inside of something. And if you still can't find it, then you make a wild, educated guess.
Yeah,
Yes,
I had
and-
a feeling we're coming to there. Yeah.
And you go for that.
Right.
You go for what would have been in a similar car.
And nobody can argue with you.
No,
Right.
no.
Thanks.
And if they do, you just say, well, put the other car next to it, and let's
Yeah.
look at them
Yeah,
together.
let's prove it here.
Yeah.
They're going to walk away.
That's it. There's leather and there's leather, okay? Now, these hides that you see out here, this is ostrich, this is ostrich. The nubs are the quill points. That's where the feathers grow out from. This piece of alligator is not alligator. This is a piece of leather that was pressed in a die with that alligator print on it, and then they ran a roller over the top a hot roller and it heated the surface, the high spots, which darkens the high spots. And that's the way they get that effect. Now, a real alligator or crocodile skin, you would be able to put your thumbnail underneath the tiles and you could lift the tiles. When you can't lift the tile, you know it's a piece of cowhide that's been pressed. But there are good imitations and then there are bad imitations. This is really a good imitation. Snake skin. This is a rattlesnake out of my backyard. Yeah, I won the fight. Anyway, I do this not to use for upholstery, but I do it kind of as a hobby, and I make hat bands out of them. Now, and you can see it, I've dried it and tanned it in a curve, and that's so that when I make a hat band, it fits on the hat. Okay. You can pick up and handle any of these pieces of leather that you like.
Where's the shop located?
In Escondido. I have, if you get one of my business cards off of that table or a piece of propaganda, it'll have it on there. Now, this is a stingray skin, and you see this little shiny spot here. It looks like pearls. That's a little high spot on his back. There's two of them. There was one there, and there's one down about here, someplace. And when they use these for boots, they just dye the surface and then they sand off these high spots. And it's very pretty, it's very decorative and kind of elegant looking. For upholstery work, I like to use a full sanded skin. Now these have been sanded down about 30 to 40%. And so the whole surface is flat. And then we dye them in our shop. We use an aniline dye. Now, an aniline dye is transparent. It doesn't have a lot of pigment in it. You see a modeling in the skin, in the dye. Every skin is a little different. Every animal is a little different. And they all have their own signature, and that's that animal's signature. One of the beautiful things about working with something like the stingray skin, if you saw in the pictures, you saw they were cut in pie shapes and sewn together to make an arc, to make a sunburst. And every one of those is a little bit different. And that's the beauty of it, because you're seeing nature as it really is.
Where do you get the stingrays?
They're farm raised, and we get them out of Indonesia. And I generally buy them bleached, bleached white, and so that we can dye them anything we want to dye them. If you look at a piece of leather, that's how thick a cowhide really is. And if you look at it, it has a dermis and an epidermis, just like we do on our skin. You scratch your skin and you cut the surface, it bleeds, but you haven't cut all the way through the skin. And an epidermis, just where all the strength is in a hide. When you see an advertisement in the newspaper or on television for a three-piece living room suite for $499.95, genuine leather. Well, it is genuine leather, I will guarantee you that. However, it is the second or the third cutting off of that hide. The first cutting, the top grain, either goes to the garment industry or it goes to the upholstery, the high-end upholstery industry. The second and third cuttings go to commercial use for chaps, leather aprons in shops, industrial use, or they coat the top of it with a plastic material, run it through a roller and imprint a pattern on it and sell it as genuine upholstery leather. But it's not strong, it's weak. And in about 6 months, you find that it starts looking like this. And it's cracking and it's falling apart. Now, that is dermis. It's right there. No strength to it. This is the epidermis, and you can't tear it. It's strong. And they use a skiving machine that they can do a whole hide with. And it's a set of rollers with a very, very sharp blade in between. And it's like a bandsaw, horizontal bandsaw. And it saws the backside of the leather off. We have the same thing in our shop, but that's as big a piece as we can skive right there in the width. And we use it for making binding for our carpets and seats. Now, this is the weight of the upholstery leather that's on the seat. This is the weight of the leather that's on the little bead or on the edge of the carpet. And you can look at those and handle them. And now this is a piece of water buffalo. Water buffalo is really very rugged, very durable, has a very large, very strong epidermis. It naturally has this wonderful grain in it. So it's really quite lovely to work with. Out on the other table, there's a book showing a Hispano-Suiza shooting brake. And in that shooting brake, we did that in unfinished water buffalo. And it was lovely to work with. It's another Peter Mullen car. And Peter wanted the car to look rugged, like a shooting brake should, and like something that you would use out in the bush in Africa. So I showed him a piece of water buffalo, and he liked it, and he thought that was really grand. He said, can we dye that a dark brown or a medium brown? And I said, yes, we can, of course. I can get it any color you want. Well, when I went to buy the material, my source told me that they no longer supply unfinished water buffalo. The water buffalo that's sold for upholstery and garment use all comes out of India, and that India was only selling finished hides. And I said, well, what do we have in the way of finished hides? And when they showed me, it was all garment leather. It was thin, it had been pressed out, there was no grain to it, and had red and blue and green and real wild colors for making purses and wallets and garments. And I said, well, that's not going to do it all. So I spent probably about 6 months researching water buffalo hides all over the world, and I couldn't find any place that sold water buffalo skins. And a friend of mine who was a hide broker called me, and he says, Alan, are you still looking for water buffalo? And I said, yes. He says, well, have I got a deal for you? He said, one of my suppliers is in Pakistan, and he has a cousin that's a farmer, and his cousin raises water buffaloes, and he'll sell you 10 cows. And I said, what am I going to do with the 10 cows? And he says, well, wait a minute. He says we've got it all worked out. In the nearby town, the butcher will butcher the animals and ship the skins to your tannery in Italy in trade for the carcasses. He wants the meat. And I said, okay, that sounds like a good deal. So we contacted the tannery in Italy and said, we have 10 raw water buffalo hides coming to you from Pakistan. And they said, okay, how do you want them done? And I said, I want them natural crust, which means they just tan them, and they're rigid, they're hard, they're full thickness, and they look like a big piece of cardboard. You can pick them up on one edge and they stand straight out. And I said, that's the easiest way to ship them, cheapest way to ship them. Send them to the finisher in Los Angeles, and we'll finish them over here. So they did. And the finisher called me and he said, Alan, he said, I've tumbled these hides and softened them up, and they softened really nice, but they're horrible hides. They're awful. So they're full of holes, they're full of insect holes, they're full of scratches, thorn bush scratches all over them. He said, they're awful. And I jumped in my truck and I came up here to look at them, and I looked at one and I said, that is awful. I said, but let me take it back to the shop and have a look at it, see what we can do with it. And so I took it back to the shop and I got to thinking about it, and I thought, you know, might not be a bad idea if we just used them like this, with all the scratches and the indentations and the discoloration and everything else. You know, he really wants something rugged looking. Well, that's rugged, really rugged. So I draped one of these hides over the door just before Peter and Merle came down to look at the car and look at the hides. And they walked in the door, and Merle looked across the room at the hide laying over the door of the car, and she says, that's it. That's it. Don't do a thing to it. That's it. And so that car is done in unfinished, wormy, scratched water buffalo hides with seagrass floor mats and a rattan-wrapped steering wheel.
I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
What advice would you give to young people who want to start out in this industry? You were fortunate to, your father sort of got you started in terms of apprenticing at a very young age, but are there shops that actively apprentice young people?
Yes, yes. We offer a summer internship, as do many, many, many other shops around the country. And also McPherson College has a 2- and 4-year degree in restoration and restoration technology. They're very, very good college, very nice people to work with, and they place they place 100% of their graduates.
I do have some questions.
Yes, ma'am.
So, but for older cars, you said fluff and fold, and then there was cars
Yes.
that, but what percentage of these cars are original, and how much are remade or created, would you say, on average? I mean, none of the cars are average, but
Yeah, well, when you can find a car that's all together and running, just a nice old car that needs a total restoration, may have been painted and upholstered a time or two, and the engine rebuilt a couple of times, and rust and all that sort of thing. You're probably going to use 90% of what's there. And so, yeah, I'd say at a minimum you're going to replace 10%. But now you have to understand that all of the upholstery and some of the wood will be new. All of the paint will be new. All of the insides of the motor will be new. So I'd say probably at very best you would have a car that would have only a 10% modification.
As you just said, it really depends on the aspect of the car, whether it's the upholstery or
Yes, exactly. Yes, sir.
For those of us that have a car and don't have too deep pockets,
Yes.
what kind of, do you do a second or third tier restoration? Just
Oh,
to
yes.
get it- you do?
Yes. we probably actually the bulk of our business is taking cars that haven't run in 10 or 15 years and get them running again and drivable where the customer can actually drive the car. And then after that, then they start looking at the cosmetics and working on them a little bit as they can. And you know, they'll ask me, well, how much will it cost to do the body and paint work on my car? Well, they set that as another goal for later on. But the things that you want to do is you want to change all the fluids, make sure that rebuild the fuel pump and the carburetor and the ignition, and make sure that the car and the brakes, okay, make sure that the car will run and stop. And if the car will run and stop, then you can have fun with it.
So you can do something
Oh yes.
for a reason.
Well, every car is different. Her what'd you say you had a Cloud 3?
Drop in.
Yeah, her Cloud 3, brakes on her Cloud 3 are expensive because they're part mechanical and part hydraulic, and they have a servo unit on the side of the transmission that operates the manual part of the brakes. But I had a man yesterday asking about his 52 Chevy pickup truck. Well, those brakes are cheap. And the parts are all available, and it's just a matter of exchanging parts and having the drums turned. And so his car, you can put all new brakes on his 52 Chevy for about $300. On her Cloud 3, about $3,000. And that's the difference.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
You talked about original build sheets.
Yes.
So the research part has been pretty in-depth. I've just got a 37 Dodge Coupe.
Yeah.
And even just finding good interior photography, like what this car looks like, has been slightly a challenge. What kind of direction would you point me in finding that stuff?
Go to Horseless Carriage Foundation Library in La Mesa, California.
Thanks for coming, Alan.
You're very welcome.
Thanks very much.
You're quite welcome.